before raising the compassion for other sentient beings, you have to think about those who are suffering due to samsara, the general samsara, and also suffering. And while doing this, you'll be able to see the properties of the suffering of samsara which are intolerable. In this world, there is no being which is independent. You have to remember this all the time. The selfish thought is similar, is same to thinking that I exist in this world independently. The selfish thought is similar to thinking that I am the only one existing in this world and I'm able to survive alone. But the life itself, there are no conditions which are independent, and also in the relation with so many others, it exists together, and therefore, even if one relation falls back or destroys, I cannot exist in this world. Especially the thing that forms the human is not only the human, but amongst life, the human beings have the most relation with many other living things. So when you say independent, it's a very wrong ideology. We can never be independent, and it is impossible to live an independent life. And also, from so many different things, if you say that you're going to live an independent life, that's your misunderstanding. But you are not able to live in an independent way. And also, if you think about the word independent, then an opposite way of saying it is similar to related, but what here I'm talking about is it's selfish to live an independent life. In so many different aspects and from many different dimensions, you need to have understanding. So the opponent who is related to you, or you and I, or even the evil and the good, or darkness or lightness, and also intelligence, and also the foolishness. If you take it that way, then the things that are existing in this world, you can think that they are relative. But even human beings and Buddha, they are also relative. If the common people, if the lay people don't exist, then Buddha is not required in this world. So if you call yourself only Buddha, then what meaning can it have? There is no meaning to it. And so therefore, it happens due to something that's relative, and there's nothing that arises in an independent manner. If they are true and if they are the facts, then the thing that we say we want to be enlightened, we want to get enlightenment. If we do not have it with the aim of saving all other sentient beings, we also need to ask if it's possible to become Buddha. If it is the only suffering that I have alone, then I will try to overcome it alone. But if you think about it, well, everything, even marriage this time, if it's if it was contagious to only one person, then it would not have so much problem. But if the same condition is given, then it was contagious to so many different people. That's why it became a problem. And likewise, the suffering of common people also, it is applicable to all other beings, and the life and death and also sickness is also applicable to everyone. When we are alive, we talk about this life and death and sickness, but if you look at it from bigger frame, then while repeating this process, and also when you look at it in samsara, it's not only the suffering that you get in your one life, but through so many different lives, you keep suffering from the uh, same pain. And if we say it will continue, then releasing ourselves from the six different realms, it means also similar to getting away from the suffering. I don't think it is anything different from the saying that we get ourselves free from suffering. And if we feel this deeply, then we have to make sure that we think that we are trying to save everyone from suffering. And we also have to we also cannot have the thought that we are going to save all other beings too. Everyone is going through the similar suffering, and so I'm going to free everyone. And if we do not have this kind of thought, then the becoming Buddha is impossible. But in Korean Buddhism, they often say, without them you can gain enlightenment directly, but you need to provide us the proof in which part of the sutras is written. In the scriptures, it's never mentioned that you can directly gain enlightenment without those process. And even in the Paramita Sutra and also Avangatara Sutra, it's written that those you cannot gain enlightenment directly, but you also need to go through process. And the books that spoke about the direct teaching, they also mention the same. On the basis of Avatamskara Sutra, when you study the teachings that spoken like Venerable Sang or even the saints, the the very bodhisattva, only if the compassion becomes a basis, then it provides the route to the enlightenment. One thought, you need to have the bodhisattva of one thought. By raising the great aspiration that you want to become Buddha to save all other sentient beings, you can become Buddha. That is also said the same in the middle way and also in Avatamskara Sutra, and in all the books it's written the same. So even here, before you raise the compassion for others, you need to, well, the translation is not done, not very clear, but before you have the thought that you are going to save one or two lives, you have to observe the general suffering of all sentient beings. The suffering of all sentient beings. That too, the human or the people with money. Well, if you just because you have money doesn't mean you can be free from the suffering of life and death and sickness and aging. But even when you're born in the heaven, even in heaven, you all have the sickness and disease and also life and death. Then if we study this, then amongst the sentients living in these six realms, there is no being that doesn't go through suffering. And in the suffering, generally, everyone is exposed to the suffering. Even this matters this time, if the government couldn't control this, and if it was spread to all provinces of Korea, then whole of the country would have suffered. The government could be blamed for because they did not have a deep insight for the suffering that the citizens of Korea could suffer. Well, it doesn't matter if they were not able to do or they didn't do, but it all started off from the mistake. But the being called Buddha, if there is no given condition that the Buddha is doing it for the goodness of all sentient beings, then we do not require Buddha too. The spirit of Mahayana begins from here. The spirit of Buddhism begins from here. But if you speak for yourself first, then it does not give the condition. You need to have the you need to have the condition that you are going to have a deep insight for the suffering of all sentient beings, and also it is for others, because you have uh, abundant things to eat and you are living a quite good life. If you think that that's more than enough, then there is no meaning to it. It's just that you have a knowledge that's been passed down to you. Why do you think the saints of all ages thought that in Buddhism, if you become a monk, you need to live a poor life and not having anything? And why do you think they said that? It is not about the matter of enjoying or not. They ask you to live a poor life first, because if your stomach is full, then you're not going to study. And it applies the same for all other people too, the lay people too. If you have a lot of money, then you feel like you can solve the problems with money, but in front of death, you cannot solve it. In front of a deep disease or a very serious disease, there comes a point when you cannot solve it with money or medicine. Even the things that you eat, you cannot solve with money. No matter what you say, there are things that cannot be done. Just like that, at the time of coldness and also hunger, you feel that all other sentient beings are going through this suffering, and those who have not gone through the suffering, they are not able to have the initial thought easily. Why? Because they believe that the bus is only about 71, and if you don't have rice, you can eat ramen. Well, ramen is more delicious. If you think it that way, if they think that way, then they cannot understand the people who suffer because there's no rice. And if they are trying to do business for this world, how can they do the business of how they can govern the country when they don't know what's going on? They would assume, how is that possible? When also I talked to them about this, I was often asked back, how is it possible? But it is not. It is not like that. It is happening. So before the motivation for us to become Buddha, you need to have the motivation that it is not my suffering, but in order to help people, the, the suffering of all sentient beings, because all beings in these six different worlds are going through suffering, and in order to solve that, I want to become Buddha. And if you have this kind of thoughts, then you're actually aspiring for sense of bodhisattva and great compassion. But you should not think that when I go to monastery, that it seems monks are living a good life, and uh, we, we we are not here to live a comfortable life. That's why the regions where there are a lot of saints, those people who live close to, who live nearby the Himalayan ranges, they are very hungry. After listening to the speech of principal, well, we live in the world who believe being too lucky. We don't know how grateful we are. After listening to the old monk, well, I spoke about this for many times to you. Isn't there anything that I can do to help the school? Because the facility is so bad, and they use in a room they use two, three, four people. Well, in this monsoon area, uh, during the monsoon time, you can see the fungus inside the room because it's so humid. And also in winter, it is very cold. And the things that they eat around 10 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning. And that too, they only eat, and he only eats about like 2 meals. And that too, the meal is not very nutritious. And the Chenin school, the Tibet school, the Institute of Tibetan Dialects, the principal is about 75 years old. The monk, when I asked that I could help him, he said we have enough. And he was so sad. People nowadays, they cannot study because they have too much money, but there are no cases where people cannot study because they have no money. But us, we say we cannot study because we have no money. But practice, ethicism practice, you cannot do it if you have too much money. Because you go after something that is sweet and you lose all your concentration. And so the story about there's a story that uh, a person he wanted to become a monk, and so he took all his wealth to his friend and said, if I have this, then if I have this, and it doesn't help me with study. But his friend's answer is more amazing. He said, I cannot take it because if it's not something good for you, or if you can't handle it, then I cannot handle it myself too. But it was me. If it was me, I would have taken it. I would have said thank you very much, and I've taken it. And the old monk also said, when we studied because we are hungry. And when I asked him, on what occasion do you say that? And he said when he was studying in Tebung Monastery in Lhasa, he went there when he was 7. His parents took him to the teacher when he was 7. And when he studied, to walk to his hometown from Lhasa takes a month, and it takes him 2 months to go and come back. But whatever it is, they cannot take money because it's village, and so they take the tsampa, the barley flour, and they take butter and takes it on his luggage, and he walks for a month and gives to his mother, and then he sees his mother per night, and then he goes back and he returns to the place after an year, and there's no place to eat, and there is no place to buy too. And then they divide it, and the family divides that lump to 12 different lumps, and they also divide it to 30 different lumps, one lump, and they also divide each day's share to 2. So they only eat 2 meals a day, but that is also not in a very abundant amount. And so when you pray or when you do the teaching in Tibet, they give a meal, right? And the small bread and the butter tea, it's everything. That's their breakfast. But us, we eat breakfast and we still go. And after we eat breakfast, when you're hungry, we also eat a break, and also we also eat dessert. We constantly eat, and after lunch we also eat break and eat dinner, and we also eat night meal. And because they're so hungry at his young age, because he's so hungry in order to forget his hunger, and also there's nothing for him to play in order to forget his hunger. He just has to keep memorizing the scriptures because he's hungry. That's why, because they're so hungry, they think the hungry Tibetans, we should accumulate our merit and save those who are hungry. That's why they are able to have that thought. But for us, when we are full and when our backs are warm, then we think that others also are comfortable. So when I choose the member of parliament or the city council, well, it's 20%. Um, that if it's 20 people, then at least 4 people they should have votes from the people who has low income. But normally when they have gotten the vote, they do not do what they promised. After they have been elected, they act on for their profit. But that's what I feel, that if 20% could be representing those who are not earning properly. So, if you are hungry or if you are uncomfortable, the suffering, we have to feel it, and when we once we feel it, we should not have regrets or blame someone, but we should feel that everyone is going through a difficult time, and that's why. I should try to free from the six real worms, and that's where you start having the thoughts for the others. Being free from escaping from samsara or getting away from the greed and suffering or nirvana, it's all the same. So, for the good of all sentient beings, Dalai Lama said, when he was 38, 39, he understood about the voidness. For the good of all sentient beings, for him it didn't start to arise. Well, he could understand, but it wasn't becoming so touching. So he thought I don't, he thought he didn't think that it was going to happen, that it was going to be the goal of his life. But when he was about 49, he started having meditation about the suffering of all sentient beings, and it repeated, and he kept praying that he should be able to save all sentient beings. And one day he shed tears that was not stopping. For the good of all sentient beings, I should even grind my bones to help them. But if you don't do that, and even when you practice the asceticism, if you are only going after what's comfortable for you or better for you, then you're not actually providing the condition for you to be selfless. If you only start thinking you or me, we just think that we always come back to ourselves. The matter of time and the space For us, everything comes back to us, and so even for 10 years, even after 10 years of asceticism practice, you only look after discovering ourselves. But what's there to discover ourselves? That's very selfishness of practicing.
그 수행 이기주의라고요. 그러니까
So while going through the samsara, you have to observe again.
구사론에 이건 아주 구사론에
In the
너무
hell,
자세하게 나와.
you are going through this kind of pain, and due to which karma, you go to the hell, and also
어떤 고통을
uh,
받고 있는지. 응?
it's mentioned for each different stages
그걸
of hell.
들어가지고
Well, I was also fooled in the beginning for someone by someone who said some useless things that animals when they are about to die, well, they know when they are about to die and they leave
그런 사기를 쳐.
the
내가
place
나도
to die.
처음에는
But
그런 줄
I thought
알았는데
it is so
나중에
in the
가르쳐
beginning.
보니까
But
아니야.
when I observed, it was not true.
동물들이
The animals go out and die in secret because if they become weak, then they are eaten by some other animal. That's why they hide. They are suffering
그
from
고통
the
속에서
pain and they
갈망병을 숨는
hide.
거야.
So when I was
그러면
letting
선제를
go of
말씀을
Sanjay,
보내면서
well,
보니까 아
he
요놈이
was a very
원래
strong dog
아주 이놈은
and he was
굉장히
like a
힘이
lion
강한 이놈이고
before.
사자
So
같은
when he
놈인데
was very
그러니까
strong, even when
힘
if
강할
I
때는
call him
그냥
here,
이리 와
he
그러면
just looks at me
쳐다보고
and he
아
just walks
알았어요 그러고
away
가버린다고.
because he's strong. Uh,
뭐 지가 힘이
even
있으니까
when we go to the
뭐
mountain,
별로
when I
그렇게 산에
ask
가도
him to come, he does
그
whatever he
이리 와
wants
그러면
to do.
지 호흡기
And even when I go
하고
back, he doesn't even
나중에
look at
가면
me
그
because he's
쳐다보지도
strong
않아.
enough.
지가
But
세니까.
later, when he started
그러니까
losing
나중에
his
그때부터
strength,
힘이
and
없어지고
also he
이제
was going through
뭐
Alzheimer,
치매도 오고
and he couldn't
그러면
find a way
지가
back
그
home.
이 길을 못 찾아
So he
올라가지고
was
밑에
just
바위
going
밑에
around the
매달려가
place
뱅글 돌고 있고 뭐 그래.
and his behind leg, he
그래가지고
couldn't even stand
누워서
up, so
못
he would
일어나고
lie
누워서
down
숨을
and
싸고
pee.
막
It's
사람하고
same like
똑같이 치매에
human.
걸리고
They suffer from the same pain
안 들려고
and they cannot even see any
눈도 안
longer.
보이고
So when that
그렇게
happens,
되니까 힘이
you
없잖아.
start losing
그러니까
strength. So there's a
이
chance the other
다른
dogs
개들이 와서 물어
can
죽일
come
수도 있단
and
말이야.
bite
그러니까
him.
한번 물어 죽이지.
Well,
그 젊은 놈이 와가지고
there was a
죽이거든.
case when a young dog came
젊은 놈이 와서 하얀 개가 와서
and
물어 죽일 거니까 다
and he
물어 다
beat him
죽잖아.
off to
사람 아니었으면
so many.
죽었을 거야.
He beat him,
그러니까
and
얘가
if it was not
뭐냐면
human, then he could have
이제
died at the time. Well, if he lived in the
다른
wild, then
야생으로
he would have
살다가
gone
사는
into a
사람은
cave
지 혼자
himself
물속에
and
들어가서
have
죽어
died
죽어.
alone. That's because he didn't
안 물어
want it to
죽이려고.
be beaten to death.
안 물려 죽으려고. 근데 이거 이제 그거더니
So once he was just following me from my back, and he was leaning his head to my leg. And so when I came to my room, well, he never came to my room before, but he followed me to my room.
그냥 따라 들어와.
That's what he's depending on me. So I felt the fear of death for them is very strong. Normally we assume that animals don't have go through the pain, but they go through a serious pain, more serious pain than us. For at least for human beings, we just ignore the parents, but because we're human, at the time of death, we give them even water or something, but we do not even bite him to death. But of course, there are some people who does that. But I understood that animals, they go through a more serious pain. Even the birds, although they're flying around freely, but they're also flying away with a sudden sound because in order to run away. Well, even when you see the pigeons around here, we give them a lot of things to eat, and so they don't fight with the animals or dogs or cats. And even when the pigeons eat from the dog's bowl, the dog just watches. Even the pigeons, they are always scared, and so they're always very. They pay their attention to someone approaching them, and if something happens to them, and they always run away. So the sentient beings who go through those different samsaras, there is no point where they are actually free from the suffering. they're trying to be free from the suffering, and that is the law of Buddha, freeing themselves or ourselves from regulations or the boundaries of life and death. But if I experience that, and also it is teaching of Buddha that I've experienced that myself, and I will guide people away from the suffering. So we have to guide people in their asceticism practice, and we also have to provide them the light, and we also call that bodhisattva.
요즘 놈들은 동사섭을 갖다가 무슨 똥사섭으로 만들어가 쓰는 놈들이 있어. 중생이 꼴꼴
There are also some people who
지옥을
doesn't understand this well.
중생이
Being a monk,
나도
you should always
uh,
you should always be able to sacrifice. But just because lay people drive expensive cars or does different things, there are some monks who say all those useless things, and also they move around with the gold sticks. But that is not the teaching of saving the lay people from the suffering. It is never a method. It is never a means. Therefore, you will start seeing automatically how you can be free from the suffering of the samsara.
우리가 이제
When you see beings suffering, and if you can observe, and with the content that has been observed, we also need to figure out what is the cause, and because of such cause, this thing happened, and through this method, you can be free. Thinking this, and also because you think this, and you are on the very front stand, and we call that a method. The serving method. We say the Avalokitesvara can see 1,000 miles. That means Avalokitesvara can observe. And the hand, they can save, which is a method, the saving method. So many different saving method, and also very deep observation power. So if we say with our daily words, we say they have the strength to observe the suffering of like people, and they have and Avalokitesvara has a method to save people from suffering. That's why we call her the Avalokitesvara. Therefore, you automatically start seeing how you can free yourself from the suffering of the samsara. Once you start seeing, then once you start seeing, and also you know because of what happens, and if you also know the way to be free from it, then you also know that you don't have so many different methods. You understand that the strength of you is not strong enough because you have never thought about others, but you have never thought about your others, but you only thought about yourself, and so you see the suffering of others, but you don't know what to do. The bodhisattva who first had that kind of thought, if you start having the thought, you'll soon be falling into darkness because you don't know what are the methods that you can do. And starting off from understanding that you don't have strength, you should begin. Although you are listening to this for 10 to 20 years, you have not been able to persuade your husband. It doesn't happen, right? Because it's weak here. the person is the closest person to you. When we say the closest, and well, if I have but if we have the coloring here close to us, and if the water splashes, it gets onto me, but it's far if it doesn't color me. But the explanation or the persuading power, if I only have the strength to speak accurately, or if I have the merit to persuade, then of course I will be able to persuade the husband or the kids. We will be able to. But not even having that, we all know that we don't even have the strength. No? Have you been able to persuade your husband? Were they possible to persuade? Um, I'm sure that you just heard like yellings back. Until the time of death, they will be very persistent. They don't listen. Why? Because if you look at it in an opposite way, then it's not that the person doesn't listen to you, but uh, it also means you don't have the strength to do that. You cannot even persuade someone who is the closest to you. Well, that is very important to have the strength to persuade someone who is the closest to you. If you cannot persuade even your husband, then and although you're giving a lot of money to your children, at the time that you give them, like even when you're giving $100, if you speak to them, then you'll be able to persuade. Bringing up kids, normally it takes about 5 million Korean won. So if you only talk to them each time you give them $100, some good sayings, I believe they would take their mothers as some saints. So it means you do not have the proper understanding of the suffering, and also if you leave them just like that, there's no way that they can be free from suffering, and that whatever that they desire right now is going to disappear one day. And at the time that they start disappearing, the things that they have attachment for will put themselves into suffering. Was there any time you were free from the suffering on your own? In order to remove the suffering, what kind of method do you need? And if you inspect the questions one by one in sincerity, you can find uh, the the reason or cause of the suffering. If you study this, and you know that the suffering arose from your ego. In the situation where you're attached to the point that it's on me and all the desires on me and that you cannot let go, you also understand that the foolish ideas or foolish behaviors of yours in order to do things on your way, and all of them, because of what did I do that, you have to think about it in a reasonable way, and you will be able to analyze it in a reasonable way. And so what am I going to let go? The thoughts which I were persistent about, and also my agony, and also my persistence, because it's my body and my thoughts. Well, only if you reach to the stage where you are able to let go of them, understanding that they are not entirely yours by nature, you will be able to proceed. The essential cause of the suffering is the spiritual disability that began from your karma and your agony. So, from the attachment, the greed and also the pain started, and because of its repetition, the karma, the strength of karma begins. And because of the strength of karma, it gives you the consequence, which is the suffering. And because of that, you have to cut down the repeated uh, action of karma. You have to cut it there. If if there is a virus in your body and if I'm sick, then you have to attack the virus in the body and you have to kill it or chase him away. Then only you'll be free from suffering. And what is our disease? I'm not someone who was suffering from the very beginning, but I misunderstood and I thought it was there, and but it's actually void. But I misunderstood it is there, and the suffering began from my greed. And if I don't let that go, there is no way I will be free from suffering. Even if I pray wholeheartedly, it cannot happen. So if you pray, if you say that if you pray things will come true, that's all a lie. Uh, that is, you repent the things that you have done wrong, and with the repentance, you will not try to. With the repentance, you will start making good deeds, and through the change, the happiness comes to you. But if you pray for your own greed, the greed will never be satisfied. But the religion in Korea, all of them, more than 90%, uh, they only say that the happiness comes to you because of your prayer. There is something that is not tolerable, and there's shamanism at very low level, and just like an exorcism. That's why even with the evolution, we are not able to do a proper evolution in terms of the religion. So the very basic reason for the suffering, it is the spiritual disability that began from your karma and agony. So if we say it arises spiritually, it also arises from the body. If you have spiritual problem, then your body will also have problem, because they are not two different entities. Occasionally, you can be free from suffering from time to time. Remove the cause of the suffering and also the suffering. And if you achieve the silence, then you can attain the suffering of cessation of suffering. So you know that the suffering began from my misunderstanding, and if you follow the proper method, you can get rid of the suffering and you can attain nirvana. And if the practitioner, if the Sikhism practitioner practices Aranka, and if the Hinayana practitioner can also attain the nirvana, we say that they were able to they have attained the stage because they've been free from their suffering. Well, we have this while we are living from moment to moment. When the strength of karma is very weak, we misunderstand that we are actually free, but that's a misunderstanding. When we say we have been free, it should never happen again. If the suffering occurs repeatedly, that is not okay. So even Buddha, when he was doing his own practice, although the teacher said he has attained a certain, very strong level, but Buddha understood that the agony arose to him when he wasn't following an outside way, so he started his practice once again. following live from the suffering and the cause of the suffering, it's obvious to have the sense of emancipation from delusion.
고통을 바라보면
Where
우리가
if you observe the suffering
고통을
and
봤을 때
the
고통으로부터 벗어나려고 하는
when you observe the suffering, we also have the thought that we want to be free from the suffering. Also, you guys, when you're fighting every day with your husband, and if your heart is not comfortable, then you also have the kind of desire to be free from this house. And I believe your husband feels the same.
생기겠지만
I cannot live with this wife, and I wish I could go somewhere else. Well,
그랬으면 좋겠다.
I think it's quite also a good system in India.
그 출가기라 그래서
When you're about 30, since they marry early,
일찍 결혼하니까 30명 되면 그냥 남자는 그냥 집에다 놔두고 다
the man gives everything to the house and deposits away, and he goes to his own practicing, and he doesn't come back, and we call the shaman.
우리나라도
Well,
30을
in Korea, about 30, it's a little difficult to earn money, so maybe they're about 50s, we could let them go. If they're about 50, we can ask them to go, then we don't even have to cook 3 days a meal for them. Like 3 meals a day for them. We live until like 80 years old, and we feel that I cooked for him for 60 years, and you complain. But maybe we could also change Korean system, and when they're about the retirement, we could retire a bit early, and
뭐 그래서
they can become a monk, and they could pray and meditate and also learn a little sutra. I think it would be good if they can learn live that way.
예?
I think it's a good system,
차는 제동 것 같아.
but you guys don't answer.
안 하네. 진주
Now it's too
지금
old.
늙어버렸어요?
We can also build a new system that's also okay even if you're old. So you need to have the sense of emancipation from delusion. You need to have the thought that you want to be away or free. Even when you are sick, we need to have the thought that we want to recover, and then only we'll go see doctors and also we'll try to cure the disease.
그러니까 이게 벗어나고자
So
하는
if you don't have the strong sense that you want to be free from it, then you're bound to go back to it. That's why we say we call this the emancipation from delusion.
새 속에
Raising the suffering again and again in this common world, we have to be free from it. We need to have this thought, and only if this thought is very strong, you will have the strength to be free from it. On top of that, even other sentient beings, if you have the desire to free them from their suffering and the cause of the suffering, you actually proceed on the actual practice in order to practicing the compassion.
되면서
So while practicing yourself, you understand that other people are also going through this difficulty. And Buddha also, because he saw the way where the agony disappears, and if you do that too, you'll be free from it and you can live a proper life. Will be so peaceful and you can live without suffering.
살수 있는 길이 있습니다 하고 가르치기 시작합니다.
And that is the method.
이게 이제 방법이라. 벗어나는
They
방법.
started talking about the method to be free from it. That's very important.
그래서 이제 일체 중생이 전부 다 고통을 받고 있구나라는
So while you have the thought that all sentient beings are going through suffering and you want to free them from their suffering, and having this thought, we call it compassion.
저 중생들한테
I'm going to save those sentient beings. And while doing that, what is the method to save them? Unlike Hinayana, in Mahayana,
달리 대승에서는 그
we say that's a paramita, not like
일체 중생을 위해서 내가
for the good of all sentient beings, I offer anything. The material or even the laws are explained to them the
설명해 주지.
Buddhist
왜
doctrines,
내가 최대
and
공부만큼
also
잘하고
when they
그
are
다음에
afraid,
그들이 두려워할
uh,
때 내가
I lead
세상
them
인생
through
앞에서
many different lives
그들이
so that they could be free
두려움으로부터
from
벗어날
their
수
suffering
있게끔 일로
and
하면
their
되겠다.
fear.
일로 하면 되겠다.
You have
그건
to
그걸
start raising those
말을
heart.
해야 돼요.
But
근데
if I
이제
tell
여기서
you
이런
so,
이런
then you
거는
tell me that,
몇 가지
uh,
이렇게 뭐
what will happen if only I do
추측해보고
it?
이 세상에
But
사람이
in this ball, everyone
내가 볼
changes
일이
with
내가
how
가는 마음을
they
내면
start raising their heart.
그게
So
크게
if they start off, then you will
원래는
change
그것을 소유해라
uh,
그러고
in
그렇게
in a
마음을
drastic
내고
manner.
실제로 내가
And so
바뀌어가는 것을
a
갖다가
wise
처리를
person
하는 거예요.
should. A wise person refers to someone who changes their heart and becomes a compassionate person. You
내가
should
지금
not
뭐 자기를
think
비하하면서
a
나는 뭐
pessimistic way of
맨날
yourself
그게
and say, "Oh,
그 뜻을
well, it
뭐
seems the idea
인간들
is
보니까
fine,
그런
but
것
I'm
같아.
just going
나는
to
그렇게
live on my
그러면
own."
소용이
That's
없어.
someone who has very
로비하지
strong karma and also very petty people. First, asceticism
먼저 수행자가
practitioner
일반적인 수행의 방향을
uh,
밟아야 하는
has to follow
전생과
the general
후순의 길을
practice,
벗어나야 되는
and
정신적
they have
수행
to proceed with
최이를
the higher
달성하는
level of
방법이다.
practice,
그러니까
and this is the proper way to accumulate the experience.
저도 수행을
So
했지만
even in practice,
절대
nothing happens
한꺼번에 뭐
at
되는
one
게
go. In
없습니다.
one go,
한꺼번에
you
뭐가
cannot gain
바로
enlightenment
그냥 승부를
at a
해버리거나
time,
그런
and
경우가 전혀 없다. 그
even
여기에서 분명히
Even Shakyamuni Buddha
부처님도 삼아성직업을 갖다가
has practiced for so
닦았다는 얘기를
long throughout
했단
many
말이야.
different lives.
삼아성직업을 닦았다라는 얘기를 갖다 하셨는데 보통 사람 어떤 사람들은 그냥 갑자기
Although Buddha
깨닫는다고
said
하고 얘기를 한단 말이죠. 그건
he has practiced and he has
경쟁적
also
근거가
done a lot
없다는
of
말이죠.
practice, but there are some people who claims to
그래서
say Buddha gained enlightenment out of sudden, all of a sudden.
바로 깨닫는다 모든 사람이 바로
But
깨달을 수
if
있다라는
the
것을
given
전제로 한다면
condition is that if
그러면 그
anyone
얘기가
can get enlightenment
사실이라면
at one go, then
그렇게 해서
just check
되는
how
사람이
many
몇 프로나
person or
되는가
how much percent of people gains enlightenment following that way, and also
그렇게 해서 됐다고
uh,
하는 사람이
who are
정말
those who
부처님과도
said
자세히
they
들여다보면
have gained enlightenment like that. You have to
그건
compare with
아주
Buddha, and you have to look at it
냉정하게
in a very in a way that
그러면은
is very
예,
proper.
지금
Well, when I heard the
나는 이제
story about this
달라라마에게 그
from
얘기를
Dalai
들으면서
Lama,
이제
I felt
아주
for
또
him.
이렇게 공감을 했던 것이 당신은 그 하사도 수행을 안 했대요.
He
하사도
said,
수행이 뭐냐면 십승계를 바꿔서 인간
he
이하로
said he has
떨어지지
not
않게끔 악행을 하는
practiced the practice
선행을 하는 거.
that
다시 얘기해서 인간 이하에 떨어질
doing
수 있는
bad deeds
악행들을 하는 것을 갖다
that makes you
그
fall below the
악성이
human
있어가지고
beings.
자기가
So,
그
for
악성을
example,
끊어야
like
되겠다. 이렇게
killing or
정도
drinking,
먹고 살생을
and he
한다고
has
하는
not
것을 갖다
done that.
끊어야 되겠다라고
It never occurred to
생각을
him
갖다가
because it's not
해보지
there for
않았다.
him.
왜냐하면 그게 없으니까.
Because it's
해본
not
적이
there
없대요.
with him that he has not done the practice.
그 나중에
So later,
이제 나이가 한
when he
서른
was
정도
about
돼서
30
해보니까
years,
이제 십성계 이걸 갖다 남한테 이제 십성계를 개 수계를 하면서 보니까 쯤에서 보니까 자기는 그런
and when
수행을
he was
해서 해본
giving
적이
precepts to other
없는데 이
people,
생각이
then he
들더라고요.
observed, well, I have not done this,
가만 간사를
and
글쎄 나는
when he
살생을
observed, he
하려고는
felt
생각이
that he does not have the thought to kill
내가
others.
맞아 죽었으면 남을 죽이거든 하는
And
생각이
if
하나도 없고
they threatened to kill him, he would just rather die. But it never occurred to him that he would kill others. But it's not the same for us, right?
예? 우리는 그렇지 않단 말이야.
We also kill out of
장난으로
fun.
죽인다고.
Look at this grasshopper, and while you are catching it for your child, you just take one leg away. We do it in an unconscious way.
무의식 중에 한다고.
We do that not even knowing where that leads to.
그러니까
So only if it happens so, you can proceed with the next step.
무슨 얘기인지 알겠죠? 이게 이제
So the 10 years they have to live, then only you can go on with the next step. You can start practicing as a monk, and only if you start practicing as a monk, you can practice the bodhisattva. So we are a monk, and we have been given the precept of Buddha, the monk, and also we are doing meditation. But you still do things that makes you fall into hell, like drinking. Then what is it like? That's almost like while you are making your rice, while you are cooking your rice, you are also mixing the animal dungs with it. It doesn't help you or even the other people. To none of them it helps. So you have to follow the general practice. Well, also I have to say this repeatedly that after you become a monk, accumulating merit, you feel that you do not have to do that anymore, but it is not so. You still need the common words virtue. Although you have the common words virtue, but you're not going to take them. But it doesn't mean you are so unlucky, and if you don't have anything to eat and so skinny, and if you don't have any virtue to give a meal to others, then what can you do? If I have a great virtue, I'm not going to use it for myself, but I'm going to contribute for others. That is what is suppose. And if someone like that stays at a place, then in that place there are a lot of people who would come close to him and starts practicing, and you can spread Buddhism, a big Buddhism over there. But nowadays monks are like so dry, and they are like dry stick, and they do many ungrateful things, and they claim that although they do not accumulate virtue, they're actually doing their asceticism practice. But you have to perform this that accumulates merit on a normal day. Then only you can also start with your practice in a better way. If you do not do virtuous things, then it does not provide you even materialistic background to help others, and even spiritual background. And even when you are begging, it doesn't help you with it. In a way, it blocks everything. So in the common world, even accumulating merit, for example, you need to have the virtues, different virtues. Like you need to have the virtue of knowledge, and also material, and also the relation with good people. It helps you. They keep continuing to help you doing your study. But if you don't have any virtue, or if you're unlucky, then even when you go to study, they'll chase you out because you do things that are out of luck. So you have to follow the general practicing method, and then you need to proceed with the higher level. But here I have an advice to make. If you're stuck in a disease that you claim that you are at a higher level than where you actually are, then it can cause a big problem. Even in the Diamond Sutra is mentioned that do you think you have
아란다행을 얻었다고
attained the
생각하느냐?
Arandan?
내가
And
만약에 아란다행을 얻었다고 한다면
if you claim that you
아란다행이
have
아니게
done
됩니다.
already attained it, then it doesn't happen to you.
아란다행은
It is not
얻을 수
something
있는
that
것이
you can
아니라
acquire, but
모두 다
they
버렸기
enjoy
때문에
this because
아란다행을 얻는다고
everyone
하신 말씀.
everyone understands that. That's what Buddha said. So
내가
if you
수행했다고
feel that you
생각해라.
have done certain practice, if you have attained certain level, then it is not actually true.
대기는 개떡이래. 자꾸 이제
You
수행이
feel that
좀
the
되는 것 같으면
practice,
또 뭐냐고.
asceticism practice is
그냥
happening to you because you
욕심이
feel that
지금
your
사라지고
greediness is
욕심 때문에
reducing
온갖
a
그
little,
산란한
and because of your
생각들과
greediness, so many
수많은
different
그치만
distracting
그래도 우리
thoughts, when you
좀
see them
사람한테 사는
disappear a
모습을 보면
little, then well, it's happening to
이제 좀
you, but
되는
we
건데
don't say that's
그게
happening to
되었다고
you, but
얘기하는
it just
것보다는
means that
뭐냐면
the others
다른
has
것이 사라진
reduced.
거지 그게.
It's just that the
사라진
things are
경계이지.
reducing, but it doesn't
내가
mean that
되었다 그러고
you
이거
have
사라진 거는
attained this
이
stage.
파장치는 이거는 다 놔두고 뭐가 따로 된 게 있는 것처럼 돼. 그러니까 이제 우리가
So we say you live a life in a haphazard manner, and you just assume that one day you can just gain enlightenment. But that's your saying of enlightenment, but which is actually a mess.
이제 엉망이 된다.
Once someone asked me, although I was teaching the right Buddhist Buddhist doctrine, they didn't understand, and they asked me, so what is a Buddhist teaching? And I told him it's you not drinking alcohol, but he didn't understand. For someone who drinks, it's proper for him that he doesn't drink. What else Buddhist teaching could be there for him? Other than that,
그런데 그거 말고
there's nothing that's other than that for him. He needs to be sober, then only we can talk about something more. Isn't it?
그죠?
Well, someone came to me once.
누가 나한테 한번 왔어. 아주 뭐 어디
On his own, he thinks he's a very correct person, and so he said, please don't tell anyone else, but just meet him alone in solitude. So I did. Maybe he's watching this.
이거 보고 있을지
Listen carefully.
잘 들어.
So we talk about many different things, and he asked, what is Buddhist teaching?
뭡니까?
So I said, you should burn your mink coat, and then it's a Buddhist teaching. The person asked, yes.
예? 그러더라.
Is it written in Buddha's teaching, Buddha's script? I said, no, it is in my religion.
야,
If you go around wearing that,
그거 입고 다니면서 그
and how many animals have you killed?
우선
First, you have to get rid of the spirit.
그걸 입고서
Then only there will be things which are relaxing down, and you'll be able to see.
좀 보이지, 그죠?
If in an utensil, if the water is very dirty, then no matter how much you try to see, you're not able to see the bottom. But even after 1 hour, or then you start seeing things in a more clear way. And in a day, everything settles down, and you can even drink the water at the top, and you can see the bottom.
그 밑으로 가라앉히
So you can see how much ever it is reduced. And so the method to come down at first
지금 본인이 정신이 어지러워져 있는 이것을 갖다가
is that you should first start off saying that you should settle down the things that you see. But people don't see that where they stand, but they continuously talk about the great teaching.
법을 얘기하래.
There is no great teaching in Buddhism.
법이 없어. 그래서
So although Buddha says that he got enlightenment, but Buddha hasn't acquired the third eye.
그러신 적 없어요. 그냥 정말
It's just that Buddha has become someone who does not lie at all. After throwing away everything of yours, there's no reason for you to lie anymore. Even in the thought, since you have a faith and you have a philosophy,
어떤 철학을 가지고 철학을
and after
고집해서
you have
어떻게 하냐면
thrown
그걸
away
그대로
everything,
생각하니까
so
있는 대로 다
all the things you
상황
see,
정리가
you're
된다.
able to organize every situation as they are.
그렇게
Buddha
되면은
talked
이게
about
뭐지?
situation that happened so, but he did not talk about anything else. And because of that,
그러니까
we
우리가 그렇게
say
될
it's
수
possible
있다라는
to do that.
있다라고 얘기하는 거라.
It's not like there's something
특별하게
special.
뭐 어디
And also,
됐다
if we
그러면
say you're someone
특별한
special,
사람이라
then we
그러면
can
우리는
also say you are
그게
not
뭐 상관도
related
왜
to
나는
us.
그런 거
And
믿잖아. 내가
also, we
될
can say that if there's no chance
내가 왜 그 사람한테
at all, then why do we
붙잡혀야
have
되겠어?
to rely on that person? We are only relying on the person because it's possible that we also become like the person. So,
그러니까 이게
even accumulating merit, it doesn't happen at a time. And even accumulating wisdom, it doesn't happen at go.
번에 되질 않아요.
And so we compare this to a
그걸
tomb.
비유합니다.
Through study, well, study is in Chinese kung fu, and it's not martial arts kung fu, but through the kung fu, through the practice and through study, you're actually going one step higher. So we say whether we are making a team that's 7 stories high or 9 stories high.
탑을 쌓는 것을 얘기한단 말이야.
You understand?
아시겠죠?
After completing the pre-practice, you have to practice two kinds of bodhisattva. So you require the pre-practice.
예비 수행들이 필요해.
So in order to do certain level or certain practice, you need something before. So for us, even when we swim, if we do not do prior exercise, then we could also have a heart attack. And even for marathon, although we have done so much practice, even on the day that we are supposed to run, we still do prior exercise, warming up, or else the marathon doesn't happen too. Just like that, it's required that you do a prior practice, and
예비 수행이 7가지.
the best practice is 7 different offerings.
7가지 공양이고 그 다음에 예비 수행의
And the next important thing is
중요한 것은
studying the scriptures,
수행원을 갖다가 공부.
studying the Buddha's words, Buddha's sayings, and having the proper perception. And even after you have the proper perception, it's not that you are at the level, but if you don't have the proper perception, you don't even know what you're doing properly and what you are not doing properly. So it's not okay.
그건 안 되는 거지.
So after doing the prior practice, you have to practice two kinds of bodhisattva. The first one is raise the sense of common bodhisattva, and through the 6 parameters, through the 6 parameter practice, you follow up with the bodhisattva practice.
고통으로부터 벗어날 수 있도록 내가
So in order to get away from the old sufferings, I would practice like Buddha. But just because you think of it doesn't mean you have become like Buddha. But only if you start having that kind of thought in your heart, you will have the sense of believing in Buddhism will arise. And we call it thinking such a thing. We call it already the starting of Buddha. And
내가 부처가 되겠다고
having the thought that I will become Buddha, because mind,
먹는 대로 되는 거야.
because the heart is, once we start thinking about it, we follow it.
하나 얘기해 볼까?
Shall I talk about how we raise the property of becoming a thief? Well, if I think that I want to become a thief, you become a thief. And we do not call that the aspiration to become Buddha, but aspiration to become a thief. And also,
또 내가 만약에 아이고 저 아주
If I say I would become so handsome like a Miss Korea, then that's also the sentiment that I want to become a Miss Korea. Well, if it's not possible in this life, maybe in next life we could happen. We could do some plastic surgery like 20 times, and whether you have a blue face once you age or something like that, something would happen, right? After having the sense of bodhisattva, that means you have actually raised the thought that you want to become like Buddha. And only if you start thinking about it, then you will be able to start practice like Buddha. That's almost like in the farm, you have decided to change the farm into a sesame seed, and only if you start planting the sesame seed, it is not yet sesame farm. But once you start laying the seeds, then it becomes the farm that you want. But after you have planted the seeds, if you just ignore it, then the farm will not become the sesame seed farm, but it will just become a farm. You will have different types of weeds, and even the sesames will not be there in the amount that you want. Then after making the sesame seed farm, you pluck the weeds, and you also give fertilizers, and also you do whatever is required through different methods. Uh, you enable that the sesame seeds will be there, and we say that doing all the things required, we call them 6 parameters. So you are actually doing your own practice. So even when you are doing the offering, in order to develop the sense of bodhisattva that you have already developed, because when you see the suffering of others, uh, the only method to get away or get rid of your greed is through the offering, through giving others. So if you do not practice the offering, it's almost like not giving fertilizer to the farm. Well, our cook, because we do not have a farm here. Well, in the box, if we put the soil, it's only like this much, and if we give water or even fertilizer, they just lose. And so I told her that we have to give a lot of fertilizer, but even she says she's giving a lot, but in my eyes, it was only a less, and the things that she planted, they have become yellow and they are not even growing. And when I want to eat the lettuce from it, I feel so sorry for it, so I cannot eat it. So it becomes like a lettuce that you cannot even eat. So even when you think that you want to become Buddha, but to those who are going through suffering, in order to benefit them, you have to well, there are people who go through material suffering, and also there are people who go through the spiritual suffering. To them, you give them teachings, and there is some people who are so scared of death, and also if they don't have parents, then the children they are also shivering, and to them, you need to be the source of where they rely, and you have to enable them that they are free from their fear. So the fear is actually from our existence, and you have to do your own way to. You have to be the part where they can depend on. When a cow is fighting with a tiger, the owner of the cow, he cannot fight with the tiger because he's so weak. But the bull, the cow, only if the owner is beside the cow, then the cow, depending on the owner, he will fight with the tiger and fight. And And while fighting, the cow will lose its fear because he's with
그럴 때
the owner. Just like that,
스승들은
teacher
죽음의
at the
앞에서
time, in front of death,
그
they need
멘토가
to
돼줘야
be
돼.
the place of their dependence
두려움의 의지처가 돼줘야 돼.
from the fear. If they don't
그렇게
do
하지 않을
that,
때는 이
then the sense
어르신이
of
정장이 안
bodhisattva
돼.
doesn't
일체
grow.
중생을
For the good
위하고자
of all
내가
sentient
나라를
beings,
갖다
you have to
희생하면서 그들을
sacrifice
위해서
yourself,
도와줄
and
수
the
있는 방법이
method
bodhi행이고
to help them is the offering,
해치지 않는
and not
방법이
harming
균형을
them, the
지키는 거야.
method that is following the Buddhist
기본적으로
doctrine,
해치지 않게끔
and
만들어 놓은
the
거야.
regulations are made in order not to harm them.
도와주는 것 가운데
Well,
해치지 않는 게
helping
중요하다고
them,
그랬잖아.
but it's more than helping
이해하지?
them, not harming them is more important. Where
누구한테
someone said before, I'm so
분통이 터져
angry.
죽었습니다. 그래서
One nun
미국
came to me and
뭔 그렇게 통도 뭐 무슨 뭐 꿀통이나 그런 게 터지면 뭐 주워 먹든가.
one nun came to me and said she's so angry. Her neighbor,
땅을 갖다 절 옆에 땅을
they asked,
팔라고 그러네. 절대 안 팔아. 너무 비싸게 달라요.
she wanted to buy the land from her neighbor, but they are asking about the third time the price.
그 옆으로
And
개우 차가 이렇게 이제 지나오는데
when she's able to drive through that, like beside the road,
차가 절에 들어가는 게 이제
because the land they're asking for too expensive price, they are not able to buy. And since the landowner is making too much problem, seems like there is some apple tree, and they brought all the dunks from the apple from the and they put all the dunks from the village to the apple farm, and so the whole monastery smells of dunks, and she's so angry.
똥 분자잖아. 그 분통이 터져야지 네가 분통이 터지면 되냐 그랬더니 하여튼 분통이 터졌대. 그래가지고
So she asked,
내가요
I thought about it, she said.
신장 기도를 좀 해가지고 저 사람이 확 그냥 신장이
Maybe I
와서
should
구해봤자
pray
저를
to the
저렇게
protector God,
저 사람이
and
어디 뭐 똥을
so that
풀어서
when he's coming to lay out the dunks, he could fall off.
그렇게
Should I do that?
하면 안 될까요? 그래. 그래서 내가
I was so shocked. I didn't know what to say, so I said,
신장님은
the God, the protecting God is Bodhisattva, and he's someone who has practiced the Bodhisattva very deeply, and
그큰 일체 중생의 고통을 갖다가
he's someone who is trying to free everyone's suffering. And do you think he will make them fall down on the street? And she asked, don't they do it? It's never written in the sutra. Read the sutra written about the Avatamskara Sutra, and there are so many different gods written there, but they don't. There's no story about it. If you do bad things, the protecting gods, they don't feel happy, but they feel sad that you have actually are suffering. So they feel sorry that you should not do something bad, because you'll be suffering from its own karma. They will say that. So last time when I was having the teaching in Daejeon,
부패범 장소에서 이렇게 가는데 그 사이에 꼭 공고 애들이 서서 애들 덩치나 적나 나보다 더 큰 놈들이 서가지고
well, on the street there were kids, and they are very big, even bigger than me in size. And I told them, oh, I feel so embarrassed to see you. Can't you just hide a little and do it? I'm not able to pass the street but since there's only one street, what should I do? And the big guy said, I'm sorry. And he was smoking, but he was hiding the cigarette with his two hands and smoking. So next time I asked him, can you not stop that? And he said, well, that time he talked to me. Well, it's good that if we don't smoke, but it's interesting to smoke. but just
재밌더라고.
because it's interesting, you could catch some disease
그러니까 그건
later.
또 그런 식의
And he said,
얘기거든.
well, he's
네가 하는 그
reasonable
말을
on
왜
his
듣냐
own.
그냥
He
뭐라고.
said,
아이,
I don't want to study,
공부하면
and
싫거든.
if I
이러고
don't smoke
앞뒤로
this, maybe I'll
뺑뺑거리더라고.
suffer from anger.
그냥
And
아,
I
그래도
still
피우지
told him
말아야
that don't
돼.
smoke is not good to
속이가
look at, and also
몸에도
it's
안
not good for your
좋다는
body.
거지. 신장이요. 기도를 해야 돼.
So
내가
even those
기도할
protecting
때
God, even when you pray,
그 옆집에 그놈이 얼마나 나를 애를 먹였는데 신장이
if you
딱
pray
쏘면
that the protecting God will beat the
신장이
person who
아니다
is
그것은
making you suffer a lot,
대단히
well,
조심해.
the protecting God will say, do not think of those.
그러니까
So the
봐야지
Christians,
기독교인들은
if they don't
교회도
go
안 다니고
to
지옥을
church,
간다.
then they go to
무슨 하나님이
hell.
그렇게
Uh,
악한 하나님인가
if the
모르겠어.
God is so petty, if the God is so evil, and
그걸 막
also he's
핍박하고
threatening,
가르쳤어.
then
또뭐
what's the use of having the
은혜를
God?
핍박하고
And
가는
also
놈들이 많대.
nearby here, there is
그
still
저녁
quite a lot of
못해
people
너.
who threaten,
뭐냐면
your
세상의
ancestor
앞을
is blocking
가로막아가지고
your future, and so you have to send
천국에도
them
안
to
지나고
heaven, or
뭐
else you will
어렵게
go
된대
through
나왔던데.
suffering.
응?
I
그래서
was
나 하도
so I didn't know
얼짱거리고
what to say, so
그렇게
I also
왜
said,
왜
why do you
가로막아
block them?
사로막지. 그렇게
It's
헛소리야.
not okay
예,
if
그리고
you threaten people and
핍박해서
also
그렇게
say useless
종교를
things.
갖다가 종교는
Religion is in order to
탈식시켜준다는
make
뜻이지.
you
그럼
free, in
뭐
order to
떳떳하게
remove
해주기 위한
your
것들이지.
things that's
그걸 갖다가
blocking you.
가해를
But
한다. 그
uh,
종교적
the
가해는
threatening, if you
굉장히
threaten in
나쁜
terms of religion, then
가해를 당하는
it's a
사람은
very
바로
serious
지옥 가는 거야.
crime. And those who does that, they will directly go to
그러니까
hell.
하도 유럽에서
And because
해결책이
Catholic
하도
has
안
threatened
믿으면
people
지옥
that
간다고
you
그러고
go to
그래가지고
hell if you don't
요즘에
believe in Catholic,
그 젊은이들 뭐라
nowadays
그랬냐면
youngsters they say
막
after
하나님으로부터
being free,
해방되고
after gaining freedom from God, they are so
안 믿어도
happy
되니까.
because they don't even have to believe.
그게 뭐냐면
Well, that's
압박감으로
the
오는
karma
거야.
that comes to them from the
그
oppression.
계율이라는 것은
Religious
그런 것으로
virtue
남을
or
가해하고
script
위해하는
or
것으로부터
doctrines.
벗어나게 해주기 때문에 중생을 미워하는
Well,
마음이 더
they
커진대.
if only if you are free from them, it
훨씬 더 정상적이야.
makes you or believe stronger.
부처는 그런 분들이
Buddha is
있었어요.
someone like that, and
인욕행도 마찬가지라. 뭐 여러분이
well,
잘
although you
아시다시피
know very well,
불교행은
even to the way to
천사
Bodhisattva
불상을 깨뜨리고
is
부탁을
written that although there is someone
하소연하는
who
사람이 있었어
destroys the
치더라도
monastery and also the
거기에
Buddhist
분노하지 마.
Buddha statue, you should not be
그렇게 해서
angry
부처가
about it.
깨지는
That
것도
doesn't
아니고
mean Buddha is breaking off, and
깨지는 것도 아니고 오히려 거기에 분노를
well,
일으킨
the
것이
having
부처를 깨는
anger
것이고
on
맞아
top
그
of
얘기야.
that is actually breaking the Buddha. Well, that's
그러니까
actually
성질나면
correct.
부처가 거꾸로 섰다 그러잖아요, 그죠?
When we get angry,
그러잖아요.
what do we say?
아이고 저
We
사람이
say
부처가
the
거꾸로
Buddha
섰어.
is
왜
standing
뒤집혔니?
upside down. That means the
생각해
thought
보자.
has turned upside down.
그 이제 자꾸 있네. 요즘에 이제
Nowadays,
스님들은
even
또
the
나와서
monks they
그런 말
come and
갖고
say, and
시험이
also
다 그런
psychologists,
사람들 또
they
정신분열하는
also
사람 나와가지고
say that
적당하게
you
그
need to
분노를
show your
표현해서
anger in an
살라고.
abundant
어제
way and
아침에
leave.
내가 뉴스
Uh,
보니까 어떤 놈이 오토바이
where
천천히
I
가다가 와서
saw on the
뒷바퀴
news
꽂더라고.
that
친구가
because
앞에서
there was some
알짱거린다고.
driver who was pissing him off, he actually
지는
drove
한 8, 90
fast
가고
and
옆쪽은 70
had an
나갔다는 게
accident.
그그저뭐뭐
He was driving at
그런다고
70 kilometers per hour, and the other person was driving at 50
블랙박스니 뭐다
kilometers per
본다 그러더라고.
hour,
나는 다
and
본다
that's
나는 다
why he
본다
was so angry.
그게
It's
앞에서
written on the
펴
box,
있더라고.
but when I saw,
이게
well, it was
앞에서 이제 얼쩡거렸어.
well, it was written on the blackboard,
그러니까
so
이
we
금방
saw,
확 가가지고
and it was
기사소리가
just
오토바이
standing in the front,
뒷바퀴
and the
꽂히니까
behind driver he
다른
ran,
사람이 확
and
터져가 오토바이 튕겨 나가고 그
he
사람
had an
완전
accident,
돌아가지고
and
이제
thankfully he didn't die.
죽어버려서
If he
어떡해.
died, then what would happen? And such a bad temper.
성질도 개떡같다.
And after doing that,
아이고 뭐 이거 그래 놓고서는 이제
it seemed like he bumped into a bike because he was looking at some different direction, but that was not on purpose. He was just trying to threaten, but
금방 주려고 살짝 뭐 어떻게 했느니 뭐 이렇게 그러니까 딱 그 답한단가 답온단가 그거 딱 보니까 그냥
well, it could have been an attempt of murder if he had driven a little faster. Well, when you are driving at 70 to 80 kilometers per hour, and if you have pushed the car, then what is that? That's very serious. For that we can say the Buddha is standing upside down. the proper thought is standing upside down if you're angry. So even when you're fighting with your wife or husband, between the wife and the husband, you should not let that happen. If you're so angry, just run away. And once you calm down, talk again. And also, there's a fight you should never fight. Shall I teach you? You should fight when it's raining very heavy. Go out and fight. Then if you fight in the rain, you cannot fight. And also when you are doing a demo, uh, like when you have that kind of activity, then they spray water to you so that you do not and when you so do not have the umbrella, but just have it. So it should never be. It's not proper to say that if you're angry, then show your anger. And also, when you concentrate on key phrase or when you're practicing, then when you concentrate on there, then even the anger will disappear soon because that's also very void. Enlarging the sense of bodhisattva to become Buddha, you need tolerance. Tolerance is very important. The practice comes from, well, we call lazy, not doing some good deeds well. And we say also doing things that makes you happy religiously, we call that practice. So even the six paramitas and doing good things and offering, they're also practice. But doing them lazy, we say that you're not practicing well, but it is not so. Well, that's just one form of the Samatha practice, but when you follow the Buddhist precepts religiously, and also when you're doing a sense of the tolerance, when you practice tolerance religiously, that's also one of the religious purification. So you have to continue with the six paramitas, and after the prior practice, you have to do two sense of bodhisattvas. First, you have to have the sense of bodhisattva, and through the six paramitas, you have to proceed to the bodhisattva practice. Enhancing or progressing to bodhisattva practice, we call that a religious practice, and also practicing your devotion. But once you practice, well, the six paramita itself are the precepts. Well, it is actually a method. It's actually the law that teaches you how to proceed. Just like a boat that crosses the river, and also there are many different methods that you can proceed, just like with tolerance or wisdom or observation. When you do that, whenever you also need to follow the four methods, the compassion and also the the four habitual practice that you do for the good of the sentient beings. With that thought, and if you proceed, then very soon you will change. Very soon. The ultimate bodhisattva practice is you need to have the emancipation from the suffering. You need to have the wisdom. It's same as enlightenment. Also means completion of bodhisattva. But but having the voidness without understanding the compassion for the good of all sentient beings, that's also wrong. This wisdom, together with samatha and vipassana, it happens at the time when you are in the samadhi state, when they are at one. although we talk about offering tolerance, practice, all those
예비성이다.
things, but when you look at 6 parameter only, then it is a prior practice, and then the vipassana and samatha, they are the actual practice. But due to samatha, even this actual practice does not realize with wisdom, but because of samatha, through vipassana, it happens. And the sense of enlightenment at the time we call it pranya, and that's why Buddha spoke about pranya at the time for 20 years. Next, this we'll do once again in next class.
요 이제 그 네팔 혹은 인도 법문 갈 거 있으니까 요
This is about, well, it's online, but this information is about India and Nepal, the teaching. The route is already decided, so you can take this and take it as a reference.